always find in the oil and gas industry, if the wages go down, they never go back up again.
The price of oil has fallen by 40%.
Around 1/3 of the 300 active fields are currently loss-making.
In London today, around £50 billion was wiped off the value of firms.
That had a lot of impact on Aberdeen. A lot of people lost their jobs.
If you understand the toxicities that come from long-term unemployment, you can understand how that's going to create huge societal problems that trickle down over generations.
I think they don't really much care for their workers. I think they're caring about their profit margins for their shareholders.
My dad, he worked offshore. He worked in China and Vietnam and places like that, and it just sounded really exotic and things, so that was why I wanted to go offshore.
It seemed like a good long-term career. I probably started when I was 18, and I thought it was a job for life.
When I first started working offshore, it didn't really matter because I wasn't married or anything like that. But once you get married and you have kids, you've got to come home and deal with the family life.
You don't voluntarily take yourself away from your family and friends. Anybody that says to you it's not about the money, I think basically not being truthful. That's me at the top of an oil rig, 700 feet up. I was so young back then. That's looking down, give you a rough idea of what 700 feet is. I've had some great times working. And I've met a lot of people, a lot of interesting people. It was an experience, I loved it. They were very friendly. Technically, we were working 14 hours a day, 7 days a week for 8 weeks. There you go, that's two guys extremely happy because they've got beer in their hands.
A crew was a crew, we were all together, chums, we went out drinking together, we had barbecues together, we looked after one another. There was that sort of comradeship.
It's very isolated, and you're basically working, eating, sleeping, and same again. A lot of people like it, but a lot of people just can't handle it and do one or two trips and then never go back, so it's not for everybody.
Certainly there was a lot of self-medication. It was well known that when offshore guys came back from offshore, they'd go out drinking for days, so to decompress. So I would imagine now probably a lot of that was to do with conditions offshore.
There was one vessel I was on, and I was night shift, 6 at night till 6 in the morning, and they had the safety drill at 9 o'clock, so I've never slept well since I left offshore. It's been problematic. So yeah, it's definitely taken its toll.
Aberdeen has been massively shaped by the oil industry since the 1970s. I remember my grandfather saying to my mum that, there were always fancy cars in Aberdeen.
Aberdeen has a history of picking up where things collapsed. Oil industry started here after the demise of the whaling industry, the fishing industry. It's the driver of everything that happens in Aberdeen, really, or it has been. In 2014, there was a serious price drop, and that had a lot of impact on Aberdeen. It was one of the highest users of food banks in the UK, and you wouldn't expect that at all from a place that is supposedly so driven by a really successful oil industry. I think the atmosphere of the city has changed. There's a lot of unemployment in the area, and there's a lot of suffering from that, and it's very difficult to find a way out.
Because of the downturn, coronavirus and the price of oil, companies are trying to save. So a lot of people have been made redundant, put on 0 hours contract. Instead of working 12 hours, maybe working 16 hours. Well, I started suffering from anxiety and I had to start taking medication for it. It was, wake up in the morning and you'd be like, how am I going to get round this? What's going to happen? And arguments in the house over silly little things. It was tough, but it's tough for the kids because kids can be quite horrible to each other. You know, Sienna was on school dinners and got quite a hard time about it. So basically she was starving herself and then coming home so that she didn't have the stigmatisation of being on welfare school dinners. That was quite heartbreaking because that's, you know, that really got, yeah, I got quite emotional.
We do not want oil workers to be left out on a limb, and we want them to have a just transition from their work that they're doing just now, which obviously is causing a problem from the environment, and the government has to step in and make sure that they do have a just transition. I think that our politicians have been for way too long supine in the face of the oil industry. It's very, very obvious that our planet is warming up, and I think that they need to start understanding what their powers are, and they need to start using them to make sure that we halt climate crisis as much as we possibly can. Halt the climate crisis.
The oil industry is ignoring the fact that climate change is going to cause a problem. And they're lobbying to reduce the regulations, and they're pretending that they are making the change by going carbon neutral, but they're going carbon neutral on their own production systems. They're not going carbon neutral on the product. That's like saying, you know, you're a consortium of drugs dealers and your drug dealers are all clean. They're not using drugs anymore. You see, well, that's not the point. The point is you're still dealing drugs. For me, just transition means giving people the opportunity and the choice to move into another industry. All they need is to apply those skills in a different place.
The renewables industry, that looks really hopeful because we have so many engineers up here, because of the oil industry as well. Those skills are very, very transferable.
A wind farm is not any different from an offshore oil platform in the fact that these are recognised skill bases. So I don't think that they should have to pay the, you know, up to £8,000 for training.
Say, for instance, I wanted to go and work on a wind farm, I would have to go and pay probably thousands of pounds to do a course. It's all expensive.
There's a number of organisations that are supposedly looking at this stuff, and they're run by people with a vested interest in keeping people in the oil industry and making it all really slow and difficult.
The government should be pushing the transition fund more. You know, I've been offshore for God knows how many years, and it wasn't until I'd written to my local MP that I'd found out about the transition fund. So if I don't know about it, there's a lot more people that don't know about it.
I worked in the oil and gas industry from 1988 through to 2015. The change in shift patterns that was being brought in, I just decided at the time that that was enough for me. I certainly said to one of the managers that I had on the platform that the workload that we're doing, if you don't do something about it, you could potentially put me off here in a straitjacket in 6 months. So I decided to look for something else. Round about the wind farm, we've had sightings of minke whales, various migratory seabirds that the guys see from time to time.
We see a lot of minke whales, seals, dolphins, porpoises.
I certainly see a lot more of the family. I'm at home, sleep in my own bed nowadays. You can actually have a social life that you couldn't have when you were offshore. Renewable energy is definitely the way forward. It has to be. The wind is there. We've got to make use of it to try and basically save the planet if we can.
I don't think we're going to have a great planet until we do things because it's the right thing to do, rather than because it's profitable. I think that's just a nightmare that we just need to change.
Your workers are your real resource in a country. You know, they have to transition those people from the oil industry into renewables, and we need to be utilising them to stop climate change.
This is from the late Bob Crow. If you fight, you won't always win, but if you don't fight, you'll always lose. And that's a great mantra, I think, to have.